Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. Today I'm joined by four experts to talk about how cannabis businesses of any size can set themselves up for sustainable growth in this coming year with sound financial, operational, and technological strategies. While everyone is signing on, I'd like to kick things off with a quick poll and a couple of housekeeping notes for our attendees. On your screen, you see a poll pop up with a bunch of questions on it. Honestly, we'd like to know what your biggest challenges are for this coming year. Are they accounting and tax preparation? Are they banking and or processing transactions? Is it trying to differentiate your brand in a crowded marketplace? Is it surrounding driving revenue and profitability? Is it identifying the tech stack that works best to meet operational needs? Navigating, complying with new regulations? Or just the stigma in the community or region that you serve? And honestly, if there's something additional you have, we'd love to hear about that too. And while you're going through this exercise, we want to go through a brief bit of housekeeping. First, a quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so we will have this accessible at a later date. Additionally, we'd like to encourage you to submit questions for our speakers throughout today's session using the Zoom Q&A feature. Our team will be collecting these questions and we'll share as many as time permits with our speakers at the end of the presentations. So around 1:45 this afternoon, we'll touch on those. Interesting. So we've gotten your responses on the polls and very interesting to see where things are falling. As may be expected, driving revenue and profitability is marking towards the top at this point. And based on your responses, I think our presenters are going to have some highly relevant information to share with you. So I'm really excited to dig in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Walt Rampata, the president of MindBuzz and your MC for today's presentations. MindBuzz is a full-service ideation agency that specializes in branding, marketing, software development, and digital strategy for businesses in the cannabis and hemp industries. I'm joined today by Christopher Marie, a partner with HBK CPAs and Consultants, who serves as the director of the cannabis and hemp industry practice. HBK is a national multidisciplinary financial services firm delivering exceptional client services across a wide range of tax, accounting, audit, business advisory, valuation, financial planning, and wealth management and support services. We also have Scott Denholm. Scott has been working in the space for about 10 years now and was the former executive director of Metric, the regulatory software used by roughly 15 states for compliance purposes. He currently is the chief operating officer at BrightMap, a Maryland-based seed-to-sale solution provider in the legal cannabis industry. Their team is focused on unifying and improving business operations and increasing profitability for their clients. And from my team, we have our vice president of marketing, Sarah Quackenbush. Sarah oversees the team responsible for creating and executing our strategic communications programs designed to drive awareness, conversions, and retention. And most importantly, behind that, hopefully revenues. She has over 20 years of professional advertising and marketing expertise with local, national, and international consumer brands. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to kind of pause and talk about the state of the industry. When we were preparing for this webinar today, our panelists have done a great job, and you're going to get to see some amazing information today, preparing slides and some relevant information to each of their practice areas. But when it came to me, I wanted to take a moment and pause and just talk to everybody. This past year, 2020, it was like nothing anybody could have expected. In many ways, it changed the state of the world. Not just in how we do business, but additionally how we relate to other humans on this planet. And those changes transgress through so many aspects of how we communicate and touch our clients, our patients, and our constituents on a daily basis. And our industry was was very lucky in many regards, in that as the start of the pandemic began in the beginning of the year, we were looked at as essential, something that I don't think many of us would have ever thought in a million years that in these times we would be deemed essential. But it also pushed through a great deal of additional change that came behind that need of being essential. And most immediately, the businesses that were trying to stay open and operate were forced to adapt. How do we communicate and do business in a mostly separated world? And so things like telehealth that were only starting to really gain momentum took on like a wildfire, and gave a lot of people desperate for access an outlet to finally connect. And then additionally, we had things like home delivery and curbside pickup, and the industry changed to adapt. Um, but however, regardless of the changes and the things that we've done to adapt, the industry as a whole has been strife with things from the outside influences that have always been challenges, and to date are further challenges that we deal with on a daily basis. 2020 was a phenomenal year in many regards from a regulatory perspective. Now 36 states have some form of legalization, with 15 states with full-on legalization. We saw some firsts last year with South Dakota going from straight up illegal to flat out legal in the course of one ballot cycle. And it's hopeful for us as an industry, but with it comes a lot of confusion, and there is confusion as to where do we go next. And we're looking for answers in many ways, or we're looking to set the path also, because some people, some organizations, some governing bodies could use our assistance. And speaking to the oversight of our industry, we've gone through a lot of change through that in 2020. Changing regulations or discussions of changing regulations at the FDA level as to what can be categorized as hemp, and to that extent, what is legally allowable from a THC perspective. And then additionally, how do we categorize it from a consumable? Is this a drug that should only be handled by pharmaceutical companies, or is this something that can be grass, generally accepted and used in nutraceutical form to assist the public in their health and wellness? And then we've got confusion and questions as to how do we oversee and police this whole thing. And the DEA, who has been so instrumental in the war on drugs, doesn't want to be left out. They're trying to figure out, where do we fit into this now that one of the bigger pillars of our war is now transitioning to a different perspective, and how are we relevant, and how can we participate in that? And then, mind blown, we had this amazing election cycle, and I say amazing just because I don't think anybody could have predicted how things have gone, and we're still not through with it, to the extent that we saw an enormous shift in power from Republican to Democrat, and what that's going to mean for us as an industry, and the implications for law passage and moving the industry along. I can tell you, in the last 2 weeks, I've had more conversations with people about national legalization than I've had in the last 2 years. It's hopeful. So with that, where do we go? What's next? How do we prepare? Are you positioned to be able to dominate 2021 instead of being caught off guard and back on your heels? Well, we've assembled a great team here for you today to touch on some of the real important topics around being able to dominate in this marketplace with all the changes, with all the confusion, with all the things that are going on. So I'm real excited to introduce our team and hand the mic over to Chris, because I think we've got a lot of great things to go through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walt. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at. Very excited to be here. As Walt mentioned, I think we've seen 2020 was a really interesting year for the industry. I've started in the industry about 5 years ago as a CPA, and it was really a startup industry at the time. A lot of companies were pre-revenue, and from an investor standpoint, as you see with a lot of new industries, there was a lot of capital flowing in. And I think what happened is, we saw money come in without really a good understanding of what it takes to effectively operate a business in the cannabis industry. A lot of investors lost money. A lot of companies struggle to be profitable. And over the last 18 months, we saw a huge retraction in capital. What we're seeing is it's starting to come back in, but now the same metrics that have mattered in every other business are starting to matter in the cannabis industry. And so, what we've been trying to do is work with our clients to get them prepared for whatever it is they want to do. I saw on the poll that driving revenue and profitability very important, as well as exiting and potentially raising capital or selling your business interest and maximizing the value that you can get for that. One of the things that I would say that we've seen over the years in our practice is leadership teams that are diverse in their skill sets tend to be the best at operating in this industry. You obviously need to have cultivation and manufacturing experience if you're vertically integrated. Retail experience is critical if you're going to operate any type of dispensary. And then also, you need the skills, knowledge, and experience on the accounting, finance, and financial reporting side. One of the pitfalls that we've seen from time to time is businesses aren't disciplined in their financial reporting early on, and it's difficult. This is an entrepreneurial industry, things move fast. It can be tough to find people that fit the skill sets that you need. But what we don't want to do is get several years in, and then you're looking at an exit transaction, and you can't produce credible financial statements for a potential buyer. So, one of the things we always encourage is make sure that you have some level of experience internally that's going to be able to, provide credible financial statements to potential buyers, investors, and at some point, as we start to see this industry move into the mainstream, you're going to have just regular creditors like banks, which traditionally have not been available. I also stress that the culture needs to be sort of built around adequate internal controls. We find that a lot of people in the industry are very, very good about understanding the processes and procedures that go into running the business, but the controls to make sure things are functioning properly, transactions are being recorded properly, and that there's no misappropriation, for example, cash or inventory coming up missing. A lot of times those aren't in place. So those are some of the things that we really focus on with our clients, talking about how important these are and what the benefits will be 2 or 3 years down the road if you implement these up front. You could move to the next slide, please. This is one of the major pitfalls that we've seen when people want to exit or potentially sell their business. Because for a long time, the paper, if you just had a license, for example, in Florida, right out of the gate, you were potentially looking at a 50, 60, $70 million sale of just that piece of paper. I think that to a certain degree, those days have kind of gotten behind us. If you're not operating and you're not actually cash flow positive, it's going to be much, much more challenging to sell the paper going forward. There's still volatility in the markets depending on which state you're in, but really making sure that you have a sound basis for why you're valuing your business at a certain level is going to be very, very important, having credibility with a potential buyer or a potential investor. We see this all the time because for many years, you would get offers out of the gate, 20, 30, $40 million written on a napkin. And, those days just aren't really there anymore. And if you're going to ask for, an X multiple on EBITDA, they want to make sure that you're actually doing something that's in line with valuation procedures that are used in other businesses. So we really encourage people to take the time and make sure that you're consulting with experts who can give you some realistic idea of what your business may be worth and how other businesses similar to yours are being viewed and valued in the marketplace. You can go to the next slide. This is one of the other areas where we see a lot of operators struggle, and this is really challenging. The guidance and enforcement that surrounds Section 280E of the Internal Revenue Code, it just has been all over the place. And quite frankly, it hasn't really been fair or consistent in how this particular code section's been enforced. As most of you probably know, what this basically says is, in a nutshell, if you engage in the sale of cannabis, THC-rich cannabis, That is a controlled substance, and under the Controlled Substances Act, you can only deduct your cost of goods sold. So, particularly in a retail environment, that can be very difficult because cost of goods sold is very easily defined, and there's a lot of overhead that goes into running retail that won't qualify for a tax deduction. So, what we see is a lot of people who are expecting to be in a 30% tax bracket end up paying an effective tax rate somewhere around 70%. This can be crippling to the business. As a result of that, a lot of times management and operators are heavily tax motivated. And what they want to do is they start taking either positions that maybe aren't as sturdy if they're going to come under scrutiny, or they're motivated to jam as much into cost of goods sold as they can. The problem with that is now you've kind of depressed your margins, and from a financial reporting standpoint, you've made the business not look as profitable as it probably is because the margins don't look as good, or you set yourself up for potential action from the IRS because you've taken a tax position that's uncertain. And that's going to be scrutinized heavily on due diligence if you move towards potentially selling your business, selling your license, or bringing on an investor or a creditor. They're going to want to understand what's potentially out there and what contingent liabilities you may have because of this particular code section and the tax positions you've taken. Our advice generally is, I get questions all the time. How do I avoid or circumvent 280E? You really don't. It's something that we have to accept, and we have to play within, the rules that are there. But obviously, there are opportunities and vehicles and different types of structures that we can put together that minimize the impact without damaging the financial credibility of the business. Once you sort of do that and file these tax returns in a way that's really tax motivated, it becomes very difficult to unpack. And we go through this with people all the time. They're looking to sell. Now they have to have audited financial statements that won't line up with their tax returns. And so they're in a position where they either can't really give the potential buyer investor the financial information they need, or they're going to undermine the tax position they've taken with the IRS. And a lot of times it's not if you get audited in this industry, it's when, and those returns won't hold up under scrutiny. So we really try to work with people to minimize their tax liability in the best way possible without damaging the financial credibility of the business. The last thing I wanted to touch on very quickly is cost accounting. And I think in the industry for a long time, there was not a lot of focus on this particular aspect of financial reporting. And what we're finding is, particularly for cultivation and manufacturing, having some sort of standard costing methodology is extremely important to investors and potential buyers. On the cultivation side, that's very difficult because in cultivation, you don't always have a guaranteed output based on your input. So you kind of have to do the best you can. It's a little more similar to agriculture than manufacturing, although some of the same principles apply. When it comes though to manufacturing, if we're doing extraction, if we're manufacturing edibles or any other type of product where we can have a very defined output based on how much of the biomass we put in, standard costing is critical. And again, we find a lot of times that the operators have a very detailed understanding of what it takes to what the process actually entails. What does it take to cultivate, 5,000 plants? We find that the operators understand that. What does it take to run an extraction facility? They understand that. But really capturing all the inputs and throughputs that go into it in a standard costing model, a lot of times isn't there. And what we find happens is they think a lot of times that the margins maybe are much higher than they actually are. And if you go to market with margins that don't really line up with reality and they don't hold up under due diligence, you can lose credibility very quickly with an investor or buyer. And it could be it could be something that could cost millions of dollars potentially in a transaction. So, for example, one of the things that we see a lot of times, we'll talk with cultivators or manufacturers, and they'll tell us their margins are 60%, 70%. Sometimes what they're not considering are things like contribution margin. Are you using a facility that isn't 100% in use? Is your equipment, is your extraction equipment not being used at full capacity? If it's not, the margins are actually lower than they realize because you're still carrying that overhead. Even though you're not necessarily using that part of the facility, you're still paying for it. And so it's bringing margins down lower than what a lot of times people expect them to be. The last item here, and this is something that I think is very challenging because I think what you're going to hear from some of the other presenters is, the journey when it comes to tech in this industry has been tough for a lot of the owners and operators. So maintaining a perpetual inventory system, especially outside of the retail space, has been very difficult for a long time. A lot of people have used spreadsheets and different things to try to do this, but it's something that really is so important. You need to really be able to know what you have on hand at all times and to a certain degree what it costs and what it's worth. It's just something that's going to be critical for any transaction that you go down. And as we continue to see the industry move into the mainstream, these are the type of things that traditional creditors like banks have always scrutinized, and that's not going to change here. In fact, I would say it may be even tougher because they're not going to have a history of and a comfort level in dealing with the industry. They're probably going to be a lot tougher on the financials for cannabis businesses as we move forward. With that, I believe that's my time, and I'm going to turn it over to Scott. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. So my name's Scott Denholm, as Walt introduced me. I've been in this space for about 10 years. I came into the environment actually working with the state of Colorado about 10 years ago, before there was actually a marijuana enforcement division. So it was on the heels of Amendment 64 being passed and what transpired to try and get the business and operations in Colorado. So I've seen a lot of transitions, and I've seen a lot of things happening over the last 10 years as this has occurred. So I'm going to try and provide you as much insight as I can and help you understand what's going on. If you could hit the next slide for me, Walt. So the first thing I'd like to tell everybody is, and one key thing, and I know everybody knows this themselves, but you have to put it into perspective and actually apply it to day-to-day operations. I constantly hear people talking about the marijuana industry. Well, let me tell you, there is not one marijuana industry in the United States. There's 50 separate individual marijuana industries, right? I will tell you that the Colorado and Oregon marijuana industries are very, very well along in their processes compared to where I live in Tennessee, where we have no marijuana industry at all. We have some hemp things going on, but that's about it. So you have to look at all of the different states as individual and unique industries in and of themselves with their own set of requirements and own set of regulatory issues. Most of them operate pretty close to the same thing, but that comes back from the Cole memo, which was set aside by the current administration, but that was the initial driving factor and still continues to have the primary influence over what states are doing. So, and if you haven't done that, it'd be a great thing to Google that and understand there's about 8 points to that Cole memo that really are the guiding factors that are driving regulations and regulatory issues. So the first thing is, if you are in the industry and you're a grower, a dispensary, a retail store, whatever your business is, it's critically important to understand your state regulations. And if you're a multi-state operator, then you have to have a very good grip on what's going on. And then it's even more difficult to deal with because if you have, like say in California or Colorado, or Nevada, where you have both medical and recreational, you could be housing in the same building. So, from the first things that you need to look at is making sure that you have a firm grip on how all of these different factors are playing into your particular environment. And the most successful businesses that I've seen are businesses and companies that have specifically designated compliance managers in their states or in their businesses and assign somebody that role and say, okay, this person is going to be responsible because your rules and regulations are going to change. They're going to change very quickly. And you may or may not get notified about those changes. We've seen multiple times in multiple states. where people stop paying attention, like Montana. The legislature meets every 2 years, so everything's going to stay the same. And all of a sudden, at that 2-year interval, bam, a whole slew of new regulations come out. The regulatory systems change, the rules change, your operational procedures change, your standard operating procedures have to change to match those. So somebody has to be keenly aware of those things and making sure that your tech stack matches what those rules and regulations are. Because the important thing is to keep in mind is that what your tech stack is there to do is guide you and direct you. Too many times companies abdicate responsibility for what their operations are, and they put the sole responsibility for how their software is providing them a solution. Can you hit the next slide for me, Walt? Thanks. So what you need to do, and this is a big thing that I preach internally with our own team, is everybody's good at individual tasks. The real challenges that most companies face is the handoff. Handing it off from one person to another, handing off where my responsibilities begin and end, what people are doing what things, but also creating and making sure that those handoffs between your SOPs are in line with your regulations. So a lot of companies will do a good job of kicking this off, right? They go in, they're getting their license, they've created SOPs, they put all those SOPs in front of the regulatory body, they've gotten those approvals, they've kind of looked at their tech stack and said, yep, it's all working, but then it's viewed as finished. It's not finished. It's far from finished. This is an ongoing evolutionary process that as those regulations change, your tech stack has to change and your SOPs have to change, right? For companies like ours, like BrightMap, we have to make sure that we're keeping up with HIPAA, right? That we're keeping up with 280E when that finally gets put to bed and gets resolved one of these days. But to make sure that we're also doing everything in each one of the state. We were just like everybody else, caught a little flat-footed when all of a sudden the entire world changed last March, and all of a sudden things are now legal that were thought of that would never happen in the industry, right? We were talking about things like in Colorado, there was no way in the world they would ever allow curbside delivery or home delivery. But now all of a sudden, we're scrambling and changing and rewriting software to allow those things to occur. So it's critical that you're making sure that your SOPs, your operations match with the rules and regulations and also match with what software and tools that you're using are to maintain compliance. So do those self-checks, right? And you should have somebody that you can look at and assign the responsibility of making sure that you're maintaining your compliance and that your regulations adapt and change with your software and how your software is hosted, right? I mean, we host on AWS because of a lot of the things that AWS does in their stack compared to other companies like, say, a Rackspace or Microsoft Azure. So you have to look up at those things and make sure you understand how they're working. And you need to make sure that those all match up with the operational guidelines of what's going on. So work closely with your providers, right? You need to work very closely with the people who are giving you solutions to make sure they match and they work together and they work together harmoniously. Next slide. So the key critical thing, I think, to look for in your tech stack. So we talk about making sure that it's compliant and looking at things like HIPAA or financial transaction stuff, making sure that your stuff is compliant, like PCI compliant. Even though we're not doing credit card transactions, PCI compliance, any kind of money transactions is critical as we move forward because we all know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. But you want to make sure that all of those things are in place. But the key thing for your tech stack and what it should be doing for you is since it can't actually sit there and manage your business for you, can it point out to you the things that you need to be made aware of? Can it show you if you have mismanaged financial transactions. So, for instance, I know people in this industry I've talked to several companies, and they'll use money right out of the cash drawer. And I know Christopher's probably going to look up and cringe when I say this, but it happens is they pull money straight out of the cash drawer and give to a driver to go put $20 worth of gas in his car so he can make a home delivery. That made me cringe. So I can only imagine what it would do to somebody in the accounting side of this. But making sure that, that those financial transactions are captured appropriately. And because you're going to have to answer for it, right? I will be very honest with you. Coming from the regulatory side of this thing, I talked to several states, and they would make the same thing. When I looked at them and said, "Hey, this point of sale company isn't doing this, or that software company is not providing that kind of information, and they need to," the states always say the same thing: "I don't regulate them. They don't have a license. I have no enforcement over what they do." So guess what? That makes you accountable for every single thing that your software providers do. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to lose their ability to transact business in the state that you're in. You will if you're wrong. I mean, right at the bottom of QuickBooks, they'll tell you, "Hey, listen, our accounting software is great. You get audited, it's on you. We have no liability whatsoever." So, your liability always resides with the license holder. And what I would tell you is you really want to drill into your tech stack and report and understand that reporting is everything. What reports can you derive? What can you see is what happened and what is happening in your business? Can a report on the data sets that you're using to run your business and specifically to be in compliance? Can it support your SOPs? So when you look at your SOPs and you look at how they're implemented, does your tech stack match what they're doing? And can they show you those irregularities and those issues, point out the abnormalities and things that you're looking for? One of the best things you can look at is notifications. Can your system notify you? There's things like business rules engines that exist so that you can actually get notifications out of your system to make sure that things are being told to you. So look for your tech stack that can report to you and support your efforts and give you the tools that you need, the reports that you need, and make sure that they're all in compliance. And I think it's the last slide coming up. Well, thank you. So, in review of that, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that seed to sale tracking software that you're working with in whatever state you're working with, whether it's Metric, MJ3, which is now Kerna, in Washington or in Pennsylvania, or you're working with BioTrack in Hawaii or New York. You need to make sure that your software is working with those systems, and does it support and report correct compliance. Because remember, one key thing I will tell everybody, and I really wanted to take this, I said this many times when I was at Metric, is these reporting systems are reporting systems. They are not enforcement systems. I can't tell you how many times I heard when I was in the industry, why would Metric let me do things that I'm not allowed to do legally? Because if you do them, you have to report them, and you have to have a fundamental way to report them. So these regulatory softwares are not enforcement agents. They're not going to tell you what to do. They're going to give you an opportunity to report it. It's still on you to make sure that it's correct. One of the analogies I used was cars don't go 55 miles an hour, and they're not restricted. You can get into a Lambo and do 150 miles an hour down the Dulles Toll Road. And you get hit by a federal police officer, you're going to get a big whopping ticket. And you can't blame Lamborghini for how fast your car is moving. So, you're always going to be responsible for what you do. And those seed to sale tracking systems that the states put in place are not there to enforce them. Okay. Also, make sure that the reports and the information are getting out of your system in a proper way so your accountants know what they are. And so you understand who's paying for the hardware, what are all the maintenance fees that go along with it, how are those things captured, and making sure that when you're dealing with these things, that you have your proper chain set up so you know how to make sure that your tech is always running up and keeping your business maintained. So make sure that everything is supported and that you know how to react. And one of the big things that we see is what happens when regulatory systems go down, or what happens when my point of sale goes down. Who do I call? Where do I call? I've seen businesses crippled for days on end trying to deal with their tech stack not working correctly. So there's a lot of things that you can do to make sure those are right. But I would tell you is make sure that you have your IT person, make sure that you have your person who's up on the regulatory things, and make sure that your SOPs match everything so that you ultimately have a clean, clear, smooth running business. I think that's me. Oh, no, got one more. I'm sorry. My apologies. So one of the things, oh, wow, this is a big one I forgot. So the role of the technology, right? So what you're looking for is your point of sale in your point of sale system. All right. Does it integrate with your compliance requirements? Make sure that it's working with your Akernas, your metrics, or your BioTracks. Make sure it accommodates your SOPs. Make sure that it's intuitive for your users. And the reason that we created this slide, by the way, was so you could actually use it as a checklist, right? Make sure that you know who's setting up your hardware and they know how to set it up so that it's working correctly. What kind of support services are available to you, and what sort of companies are you working with, and what stuff do they offer to you, so that you know that if something breaks, right? If you bought something yourself, and that's fine, and you wanted to work with your point of sale and you're taking responsibility for it, make sure you have a failover process and understand how to get that fixed in those environments. I would look at how inventory management is done. Most companies that we talk to have a tendency to go on to what is the easiest part, or what is the easiest way of managing, as opposed to what is the cleanest and most accurate way of managing. And then most softwares now are hosted. And it's a good thing to understand the hosting services that they're looking for, or what they're offering to you. Make sure that those systems can integrate. Right now, there are software companies coming out of the woodwork. There's hundreds of them offering different types of integration and offering patches in between multiple kinds of different software platforms. So you have iHeartJane and Springbig and Dutchly and Leafly and Weedmaps, right? And what do all of those different solutions offer you? And then understanding where the more you can consolidate those down, the better off you are. Because the big problem with multiple software packages is if there are multiple software packages doing multiple things, then their integration is going to be weak. No matter how hard you try, it's going to be weak, in the sense that you can't really truly get a viewpoint of what's happening with your overall gross sales. So what I mean by that is this: if you have a texting platform that is separated from your sales platform, how do you actually know the effectiveness of your texting? What reports are you driving out of that? What information are you getting out of that? So now there's third-party companies that are coming up that say, oh, well, if you use this software and that software, then we can bridge the gap and give you better data. So now you've gone from 2 pieces of software to 3 pieces of software, and now you're spending multiple times managing everything. So don't discount the importance of your own time as a business owner, business manager, and how much time it's taking you to do all of these reportings, and try to make sense out of what you're doing. So your tech stack should really look at what you're trying to accomplish as a business: being profitable, being accurate, being in compliance, and making money. Okay? All of these things are going to take you away from the things that you really want to do, which is servicing your customers. Okay? For cultivation and processing, how will I track my plants? How will I track my inventory? How will I reconcile my inventory? Can I do self-auditing, right? So how can I stay in compliance? You need to do that as quickly and cleanly as possible. Remember, the only thing that the regulatory agencies care about is making sure that you can account for everything that you have in your facilities. That's their big thing, right? Making sure that it's all accounted for. After that, you're left with trying to sell it, market it, and make a profit. Next slide, Walt. Okay. I think this is somebody else.
Yeah. Speaking of selling
Yes.
it, thanks, Scott. I appreciate that
Yeah.
good setup right there.
No problem. There you go.
selling it and marketing it. It's been like to Walt's earlier point, it's been a crazy year for all of us, regardless of how ingrained we are in this category. Certainly in the adult use and medical and CBD space, it has not they have not escaped from the drama of 2020. So we're starting to see some really cool trends related to kind of what are consumers doing with these products in the marketplace. We're seeing that, certainly right after COVID hit, the searches for CBD and for marijuana licenses started to go up quite a bit. And we think obviously that has a lot to do with people, being stressed out, looking for ways to kind of cope with what is going on in the world, and doing their research. So we know that the market is increasing. We're starting to see those numbers sort of start to come back down to pre-COVID levels now that we're kind of all exhausted from all of this, but we still see that CBD is outperforming THC in search. So obviously there's tremendous consumer interest in those products. And that is reflected, I think, in kind of the startups. You're seeing CBD everywhere, from grocery stores to independent retailers, to, now we've got celebrities that are touting their own CBD products out in the marketplace. So it's a really crazy time to be in that CBD category. But we are also seeing that dispensary transactions are increasing quite a bit, or they did increase over in 2020. We expect that to continue into 2021. Obviously the market is huge now, and it's only going to get bigger, especially as we start to look at the possibility of federal legislation that's going to allow for legalization across the country. I think we're still a ways off from that, but it's important now for brands, no matter what your role is in this space, to really make sure that your house is in order. Because, I think we've had some good years of practicing with our kind of local markets and our state markets. But we all know, and we all kind of got into this business with the assumption or the expectation, or at least the hope, that we would move forward toward national legalization in some form or fashion. And so when that happens and those state regulations go away, or the cross-border regulations go away, this market's going to become even more competitive. So now is the time to turn your focus inward and make sure that you're doing your homework and that you're well positioned for that kind of explosive growth that we anticipate will come. Let me go to the next slide. Now, how do you do that? So it starts with an impactful brand. At MindBuzz, obviously, we're hardcore believers in having solid brands in this space. It's been a kind of an evolution in this category, and we're seeing that a lot of the brands that are winning because of some of the things that Scott and Chris and Walt talked about early on, and that they're treating it more beyond the confines of a cottage industry. And you're seeing more experienced professionals coming into the space. And so as that competition heats up, as kind of the professional bar is raised in CBD, cannabis, and hemp, it's even more important that your brand is making some impact with your customers. So you need to really focus on what it is that makes you unique. Obviously, every state has their own companies. We've got some federal businesses as well, but you really need to hone in on why, not just what you sell or what service you provide, but why what you do is different from the way that your competitors do it, right? How are your products different? How is your approach to customer service different? And one of the best ways that you can do that internally is to start by identifying your mission, vision, values. Make sure that you're aligned, that your senior leadership is aligned on that. It helps guide decision-making across the board, from, corporate level all the way to customer salespeople. Just how do you treat your customers? All of that should be laddering back to the mission, vision, values that you have established. And when you're making those, make sure that they're authentic and that they're deliverable, that you can actually deliver on them. We work with a lot of companies that have come to us with these super lofty ideas for mission, vision, values, and sometimes we have to have some difficult conversations and challenge them on, can you really deliver on the things that you say that you can deliver? If you can, excellent, let's move forward with it. If you can't, let's talk about some ways in which we can kind of refine that messaging so that it's authentic and ownable to you, but it is something that you can actually deliver to your customers. We also know that that customers now, and frankly, our culture, our entire culture, demands that brands use their power to create positive change in the world. Now, just by being in this category, we believe personally that you are creating positive change in the world. But your average consumer, and there was a report that came out from Accenture that said something like 63% of consumers prefer to buy from brands that align with their vision, their values, and their beliefs, right? And that can be, it doesn't just have to be this kind of, esoteric perspective. It's things like using quality ingredients. So if you're using good ingredients and you're sourcing them from other local reputable companies, talk about that. Be transparent about that. A lot of consumers care about how companies treat their employees. So you find on a lot of really successful brand sites that, they're talking about kind of the corporate culture and how employees are being compensated, or if they're, given extra days off or sabbaticals or opportunities to learn and expand their knowledge of the category. Those are all things that are really meaningful to consumers. So if you're doing that, talk about it, be transparent, show it off. And then obviously the kind of the environmental impact of these companies. It's important that we're talking about what we're doing to kind of, be more sustainable in this space, use less plastic, things like that. Those are all important things that, again, when we talk about kind of doing good in the world, you can do it in very small ways or very big ways. Either way, your consumers want to know what you're doing. That's part of their decision-making process, and it's important for you to make those things visible to them. So you also want to make sure that you're actively requesting and acting upon the feedback that you're getting from your customers. Social media is a great way to do this. We know from years and years of research since social media became a thing that your customers are more likely to recommend you if they've had a positive experience, if they've even seen a positive experience from a customer service perspective on social media. So if somebody has a product question or a product challenge, frankly, first of all, make sure that you do respond. And then the way in which you respond can have a significant impact on your ability to drive customer loyalty, customer lifetime value, and referrals, right? So that's something that we need to consider. You can't take it lightly. It's a big job managing social, especially when you're getting into products and consumer products. It can require multiple people to do that, but it's incredibly important to the long-term success and positioning of your brand. You can go to the next one, please. So just some fundamental roles of marketing. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're creating touch points to help you move products or sell your services. There are a lot of different ways in which we can do that, and to kind of reflect a little bit back on Scott's point related to the importance of compliance, and I guess actually Chris did the same thing. There obviously are state and legal or federal legislation in terms of what you can and cannot say from that perspective. But the media platforms themselves are constantly changing the rules when it comes to promoting products that are in this particular category. And so not only do you need to be paying attention to the compliance from an operational perspective, but certainly when it comes to marketing, you need to be working with people that understand what's happening on a state-by-state basis, what platform by platform basis, what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say. I think Delta 8 is going to screw everybody up in 2021, so get prepared for that. Eventually, they're going to catch up to us on that one, and it may make a lot of CBD brands more challenged in that space as the legislation catches up to address Delta 8. So the other thing too, and again, I hate to just keep echoing back to what the guy said, but I'm taking a little bit of a different spin on it. The importance of reporting. So we happen to live in a time and in the world where there is no reason to put anything out into the world from a marketing or messaging perspective that you can't measure. And I cannot be more excited about the opportunities to use the data that you're collecting from your marketing programs, if they're executed correctly, and if you're collecting the data that, thumbs up, Scott, to be able to use that data that we're able to acquire from our marketing efforts in terms of consumer preferences. What are people engaging with? What are we hearing from social media in terms of reviews and things like that? And take that data and use it to inform future business decisions from an R&D perspective. And of course, from a marketing perspective, so that we're making good decisions that allow us to be more profitable, more efficient, more effective with our messaging, and frankly, grow a bigger brand that is going to be, more attractive to investors, not just to customers. All of these things, when your marketing house is in order, your company is not just perceived as a higher quality, but also more attractive for acquisition if that's the direction that you plan to go in. Next slide. Cool. So it's important to think about, I think this is the last one I've got, it's important to think about your marketing from an omni-channel approach. Obviously, we talk about a lot about websites. Those are kind of table stakes at this point, but the way in which you structure your website is incredibly important. We cannot, I can't tell you how many brands that we have worked with that have kind of phoned it in when it came to their product descriptions. You have to remember that for a lot of customers, a lot of consumers in the country, CBD and cannabis is still very much an exploratory plant, right? They're not sure about it. They don't know if they can trust it. They may want to feel a certain way. Maybe they're even a little afraid of it. So there is some intimidation factor there, and your product descriptions can make a huge difference in whether or not you're able to convert that interested customer into an actual lifelong customer. So it's really important that your website is tight, that it performs the way that you need it to perform, and that you are you have the ability to provide information at every single stage within that customer journey, from the time they first land on your site to hopefully the time they hit that buy now or checkout button. Obviously, mobile apps are not for everybody. So I know that that's crazy to say, given how much of our business is built on mobile apps, but they are not for everybody. We've seen a lot of folks spend significant amounts of dollars in building mobile apps without a solid strategy in place, or plans for being able to integrate it into their existing tech stack. So we want people to, I think if the mobile app is right for you, obviously, that deserves its own strategy independent of what you're doing just from your marketing perspective and just from your website perspective. So it's something to be very thoughtful about. But it does go a long way in helping to drive customer retention when you've got a solid app there. So social media, again, it's a complicated world out there for brands in this category, but it's incredibly impactful when you can make it work for you, and when you've got a team behind you to kind of support, not just from a content perspective, but also from a compliance perspective. And then certainly automation is the key, right? Let's try and make this as easy for your internal teams as possible, while also making sure that you are staying in front of your customers on a regular and not annoying basis. So we want to make sure too that you're thinking about ways in which you can automate your processes, and that you can put your marketing messages out into the world and give your customers an opportunity to engage with you, and that you're, again, measuring that, you're collecting that data, and you're using that data to provide more valuable information for them as they become more ingrained in the brand, right? So there should be different levels and stages about how much information and content you're sharing with your customers, based on how familiar they are with your brand, and what kind of other engaging tactics they're doing. Are they purchasing? Are they visiting the site on a frequent basis? So on and so forth. So it's a lot to think about. But again, there are a lot of really great companies in this space that can help you of all sizes. Shameless plug, MindBuzz is one of them. But when in doubt, look for some professionals to provide you with that additional help. You don't have to go it alone. There are a lot of organizations like ourselves that have people in the space that understand the compliance, they understand the regulations, they can help you avoid the landfalls of Instagram shutting your page down, or Facebook kicking you off the platform. So we don't want that to happen to you. But those are important things to consider and be prepared for. And I think that's it from a marketing perspective. So we can turn it over for Q&A. It looks like we've got a couple here in the list.
At this moment, I want to take a moment and thank all our panelists. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Scott. Just an immense amount of information to take in. It's almost like drinking through a fire hose in many regards. So to that point, and to the point that Sarah previously made, don't go it alone. We live in the middle of this stuff, and as I know many of you do as well. But our focus is very laser focused on our areas of expertise, and as such, we tend to have just a little bit more knowledge than most in those areas, and are here to help, truly to assist. And Sarah brought up, we've got a couple of questions that came in. We got one from Steve and Stephen Scheinman, and one from Will Edelstein. Both kind of interrelated in some regards. And let me get them set up so that we can, as a panel, kind of tackle them, because I think they're significant enough that all of us will have some different perspectives on them. Stephen's question was very specific to what's our outlook on federal legalization in 2021. And Will's was a little bit related, but more specific to New Jersey, and wondering what the adult use market will look like in New Jersey within 6 to 12 months. I'll start off by saying, I wish I had a crystal ball to understand where everything's going to go. It would have made 2020 a whole lot different for a lot of us. So without that crystal ball, I can't definitively say which area or direction these are both going to go. Our hopes and the chattering that I'm starting to hear across the board is that, federal legalization is something that is on the horizon. When and how quickly it comes at us is anybody's guess. We had some amazing things transpire over the course of last year, and this from a regulatory perspective. The MORE Act, introduced last fall, was one of the most comprehensive and sweeping acts ever introduced to Congress around this subject. And we had support from the House on that. Now, if we can just get the Senate to jump on, we can get some amazing things to happen. So behind that, we're going to see a different world and some different transitions in many regards. As to what they're going to transpire into, I'm not real sure, but and that specifically, specific to New Jersey, I think in 2021 we're going to see a huge shift, and I've seen some recent articles about that mention this, and a focus to the East Coast from a weed player. The West Coast, Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington have always been the powerhouses when it came to the best bud and really leading the charge when it came to regulations and changing the mindset. However, we're in an interesting place now with the East Coast. Our consumers on this side of the world have been anxiously waiting for these products to become available in a legal fashion. And because of that, they're going to be a little bit more discerning than our counterparts from 10 years ago in Colorado and the West Coast. We're going to be looking for more specifics around our products. We're going to be looking for more stability in the brands. We're going to be looking for more education, more resources, things like that. So I know I didn't specifically answer where do I think things are going with adult use in New Jersey, but I think it's going to be part of the domino effect that's going to happen here on the East Coast. And we're going to see a lot of changes specific to the East Coast and the cannabis consumer market that 2021 will unfold in front of us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over as an open mic to Scott, Chris, and Sarah, whoever wants to jump in on your crystal ball thoughts for federal legalization. And if you've got any other inside information on New Jersey that I'm not touching on.
So I'll take one quick stab at it. I couldn't really talk about New Jersey, but I will say this is, I think all of us have experienced our government's need to tax. And considering all the bills that have been passed and all the money that's been pumped into the economy, trying to keep everything afloat, the government's going to be looking for new revenue streams. And sooner or later, somebody's going to pop up and go, oh, well, that marijuana thing is great, which is going to put a lot of states that haven't been willing to get into the industry a lot more open to it. Like Tennessee, we will be looking for new revenue streams to pay for all this stuff. So I think that's going to probably play a major influencer.
I would just echo a lot of what's already been said. The only other thing that I've heard recently that I thought was an interesting perspective from some of the people that I've spoken with who are pretty active in Washington is that one of the things that may make this shift a little slower than a lot of us anticipate is that I think there's a lot of push that there needs to be some sort of significant tie-in with further criminal justice reform. There's a lot of publicly traded companies, quite frankly, that are in the private prison industry, and there's a lot of economic realities at stake as we move towards full legalization. And I think it'll be interesting to see how much that plays in to the decisions that are made in Washington. So that's the only perspective that I've heard, that they said, hey, this may take a little longer than some of us anticipated with the turnover from the Republican establishment to the Democratic, basically control of the government. But one of the things I am really hopeful is that we are going to at least get banking relief very quickly. I think that's something that just has to happen for the industry. and just for the country overall. It's just a bad set of circumstances we're faced with right now.
Thanks, Chris. While both you and Scott were chatting, we had a couple more questions come in. Steve Winter asked us, can we comment on what we see as the role of technology, especially in consumer technology, as this field emerges? And then we have one more question after that, but let's address this one first, I think, which is great.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. This industry, more than any other industry before it, I think, has grown up with social media and has grown up in the world of the internet, right? I mean, where this isn't the typical bricks and mortars built, operations like your Targets, your Walmarts, and all those companies in the average retail. Obviously this business is moving out of the strictly medical into the retail market, as you can see, as it goes to each state. But I think what's on and what's available to people in mobile apps and what they're on the web and on internet sites and e-commerce, it's pushing further ahead faster than most industries, I believe. The only thing we don't have here is DoorDash, right? I mean, outside of that, pretty much, everything's open. So I think technology, your technology stack and how you interact with your customers, I think it really, a lot of us on the supplier side of this technology are looking to our customer base to better understand what your customer base is looking for from you. How can we interact with our customers? Is it text messaging? I mean, text messaging is a huge thing, right? So it's almost instantaneous, more so than any other industry. And so the technology has to adapt to that. So I think you really need to partner very closely with your providers and help them understand where and how your customers are interacting with you, because that's our link. You are our link to your customers, and that's how we work best together.
Thanks, Scott. We had a couple more questions come in. Grant Schuster asked, kind of related, but maybe more specific to Sarah, how are you using digital tools and strategy to drive in-person experience and value for customers and the business customer?
Well, first off, hey, Grant, glad you could make it. And actually, I think there's a good kind of dovetail there from an app and kind of technology perspective from the consumer side. I think we're seeing a lot more traction or a desire from consumers to be able to record their session information, journal what they're using, keep track of what they're using. And there's some great opportunities in that regard to then take that information and bring it into the in-store experience, right? So how can we, I think one of the best ways that we see kind of that in-store experience growing for real. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
That's crazy. I just lost the whole camera. So I'm just going to wing it. You probably can't see me. So one of the best ways that we can see, that we can kind of see this industry growing, and one of the best ways that we can use digital tools to improve the in-store experience is to look at kind of what's happening in the traditional retail environment with consumer brands, right? So we've seen a huge increase of user reviews across the board. That's something that I think we need to be focused on from a product perspective. We also need to make sure that those user reviews are being brought back to the R&D environment. But there's ways in which that we can.
Now we can't hear you.
There we go. Now I'm back. This has been happening all week. I can't believe it. It happened just at this last moment. So being able to provide comparison tools to consumers, right? So if they liked a certain product and maybe the dispensary they're visiting doesn't have that product, or even through Weed Maps and Leafly and some of these other sites, how can they say, you know what, I really loved this particular brand or strain from a particular manufacturer, and if I really like that experience and the dispensary is out of it, what's another one that I could consider? I think we saw COVID kind of force the issue of curbside delivery, call ahead and pick up, that made a huge difference. Again, we have to remember for a lot of people, there's still very much a high intimidation factor when it comes to some of these products. So anything that we can do to provide more information to the consumer in a really kind of easy way prior to them coming into the store, they're going to feel more empowered and more prepared to have conversations with their bud tenders. And so, you know, again, going back through reviews, comparison tools, if you liked this, you might try this. That's a great way to do it. Also, for stores to kind of and brands to create loyalty programs. That's another way to kind of improve the user experience or the in-store experience, so people feel like a VIP when they come in to purchase products. And then also being able to give them kind of discounts or incentives for return purchase and repeat behaviors. And I think all of that, again, all of that needs to connect with not just I'm glad we're having this conversation, because it's a matter of connecting what we would traditionally consider to be marketing with the technology that now is available to us, and bringing those two things together so that we're providing a better experience for our customers overall. Sorry for the interruption.
That was awesome. Thanks, Scott. We had one last question that came in while we were chatting from Beth Bory. And she asked, you know, where is the best place to learn about what advertising restrictions are? Even as an ancillary business, we are constantly shutting down different parts of our advertising, specifically in regards to PPC. So,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think
That's
the
a
easiest
tough
answer
question.
with that, before even Sarah jumps on this, I think the easiest answer to that is to call us. We will help you navigate that. That's the world we live in, and quite frankly, fight to change and make better every day. You know, there are so many challenging restrictions and specific to not just what you can communicate, but additionally when and how often or where you can communicate, and to the point of being shut down in those areas. It differs by state, it differs by mode, it differs by platform, you know, and they're constantly shuffling those cards on us and saying, okay, let's figure it out again. So I would say in that instance, the best place to find that research and to find that information is to go to an expert like MindBuzz, who is doing that or touching that on a daily basis. Honestly, because of the regularity of how often we're immersed in this, we are seeing the changes in regulations and flags for getting, you know, pulled off of Facebook and things like that way before anybody else is. You know, to the extent that, you know, we're trying to stay ahead of the curve, even with regards to search engines and search engine marketing, and understanding what new algorithms Google's going to be employing this year and stuff like that. Our focus very much is to be on the forefront of where digital conversation and digital communication occur. And that very much lands sweet in this spot for us. So
I don't have a better answer than that. The only other thing that I would say is that if you're not in a position to hire MindBuzz, do not skimp on your SEO, right? So the most important thing to consider is that a platform may shut you down even if you have an ad that doesn't mention adult use cannabis, but if your website mentions it, you may get shut down for that purpose. So it's important that every piece of content that you have on all of your digital platforms is within compliance, and that it's not the platforms are no longer looking at brands and their ads separately, and so they'll do their research, and it's where a lot of companies are getting caught up. So don't underinvest in your SEO, and then also call MindBuzz.
one last question, and this was from Etya Nowinska. What regular requirement changes can we expect over the next few months as it relates to inventory management and potentially new reporting? Ooh, this is a great one for Scott and Chris.
I guess I'll take the first one. I would keep in mind, if you go back and you look at the rules and regulations, the one thing that I would harp on, making sure that you have a very good grip on where everything that you have is. As the rules change and the regulations change, there is just the fundamental guiding principle of, do you know where everything is? Do you know where, can you account for everything? So you have to be ready pretty much at a moment's notice to be able to open up your facility to an inspector or an investigator and be able to look up and be able to account for all your sales transactions. If you're on the dispensary side, if you're a processor or manufacturer, you need to be able to account for every plant in your facility or every package in your facility. So make sure that what you have is aligned with understanding where everything is at. Now, granted, you may be in the middle of a day and stuff is going to be moved around, but at the end of every given day, you should be able to do a full accounting of your inventory and manage that inventory. Because, and I would stress that you really want to do that on a daily basis, because I can tell you, if you let it go for a day or two, it gets out of control. And the more out of control it gets, the worse it's going to get. And then you're going to find yourselves in a potential situation where you're being shut down or you're being audited on a much heavier basis. So it really comes down to a solid inventory management.
And I would echo that. I would say that from what we're seeing, obviously this answer would be different depending on what state you're in, but I don't see there being less regulation. I think we're moving towards more. I think there's going to be more scrutiny. Just to give you an example, even outside of inventory, which I think we're going to see more like states like Florida, they're going to require tracing that aren't really doing it currently. But even in Michigan, where we have a lot of clients in the industry, the financial reporting requirements and the scrutiny that the state is actually giving to the reports that they receive, it's much, much different than what we've seen in the past. And quite frankly, to a certain degree, what we were expecting. A lot of times we've had clients send those reports in and they don't really hear much from the regulators. That's changing. We're getting a lot of questions back. We're getting a lot more scrutiny of the reports and what's in them. So I think that, again, when we talk about financial reporting, inventory management, it's really time, if you don't have that buttoned up tight now, to get it in order.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, that's the takeaway, right? Reporting is everything. It's absolutely everything.
Yep. Reporting and the ability to collect the data to do that reporting.
That's right.
So, with that, I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Scott, Chris, Sarah for some amazing information and conversation today.